Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy that you're a part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at JedleyMagic on Twitter, at Reading with Your Kids on Instagram. Our guest today is Lija Fisher. She is here to talk to us about the cryptid catcher. I just know you're going to love listening to our conversation with Lija. I learned so much. You're going to learn so much too, and you're going to have so much fun. I also know that you and your kids are going to love listening to a special series of episodes I'm producing with my buddy, our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson. We're calling these special series of episodes Solve It. And this podcast, it's incredible. I'm having so much fun. We're talking with engineers, scientists, experts, astronauts about how they solve problems in their jobs, how they use curiosity, critical thinking, and creativity. You are not going to believe some of the guests that you're going to meet on Solve It. You don't want to miss it, so please make sure you subscribe to the Reading with Your Kids podcast today. You can do it on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, on Stitcher Radio, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast. Subscribe today so you will not miss Solve It. Joining us right now from the Boulder area in Colorado, she is the author of the Cryptid Duology. Hopefully it's going to be the Cryptid Trilogy not too long into the future. Please welcome to the show, Lija Fisher. Lija, how are you?
Hello, everybody. So nice to be chatting with everyone. I hope everyone's doing well.
Yes. We're recording, as we're recording this is day 3 or 4 or 5, depending on part of the country you are, of the great quarantine of 2020. Maybe that's what we'll call it. Who knows? But I'm really excited because Lija is going to take us out of this quarantine, and we're going to dive into the world of cryptozoology to find out about her great middle grade series. Tell us first, what is cryptozoology?
So cryptozoology is basically the study of hidden animals. Mythology is the study of myths from ancient times. But cryptozoology is the study of cryptids, which are animals that might be around and alive today. We just haven't found them. And a lot of people get really wrapped up in the fun of it because Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, these are all cryptids. And so some people think that it's a pseudoscience, that people are looking for things that aren't real. But cryptozoology also researches animals that we haven't found yet, but that we might find. And there have been cryptids, that were considered cryptids until they were actually found, such as the platypus and the okapi. And so even though cryptozoology is seen as a pseudoscience by a lot of people, it actually does use the scientific method to find new animals that might be out there.
This is really exciting. I was touring Puerto Rico with my educational magic show a couple of decades ago when the Chupacabra fear swept the island and a lot of Latin America. It was insane. In fact, I used to do a little joke in my show where I'd open up a box and I'd scream and go, Chupacabra, and the kids would absolutely freak out. Do you have a favorite cryptid?
There are so many cryptids that I've learned about, and I will say this isn't my favorite cryptid, but one of my favorite cryptid names is the snallygaster. And that is a winged creature that is supposed to be flying around Maryland. But then one of my favorite actual cryptids is the ugly merman. And this is like a frog-faced creature who lives in Russia, and he hangs out and smokes a pipe, and he expects the townspeople to deliver him tokens of their appreciation for him. And if they don't, then he will break the dam and flood the town. And so the ugly merman is probably my favorite cryptid.
Wow. He's blackmailing a whole town. Wow.
Pretty much.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, why don't we, I have so many more questions about cryptids and cryptozoology, but before we get into that, tell us about the two books in the Cryptid Duology. The Cryptid Catcher is the first one, I believe. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Who are we going to meet in the Cryptid Catcher?
So in the Cryptid Catcher, the main character, his name is Clivo Wren, and he is a 13-year-old boy who discovers that his father was not a globe-trotting archaeologist, but was actually a cryptid catcher, meaning that his father traveled the world looking for these hidden animals, because there's one very special cryptid that if it falls into the wrong hands could mean the destruction of humanity as we know it. And after his father mysteriously dies, Clivo discovers that his father has been training him on the sly to be the next cryptid catcher to protect the world. And, but Clivo, as a 13-year-old boy, has no idea how to find these animals that should not be real. So he eventually discovers a group of kids his age who, have their own little basement, research center, and they have been researching and finding cryptids for years. So he bands together with these kids to find these legendary animals and basically save the world.
Wow, that sounds fun, and it sounds like an awesome book that a 13-year-old boy or a 13-year-old girl would love to read, and a great
Absolutely.
book for families to co-read. What great conversations they could have.
Yes, absolutely. I find that this book is really ropes in reluctant readers because it's funny, it's full of adventure, but it's also full of things that are topical today. There's so many movies coming out about Bigfoot. There's so many movies coming out about the megalodon. And even though the megalodon is an extinct shark, some people believe it might still be around today, which would make it a cryptid. And so for kids to hear about these animals that might be real and that they could be discovered gets them so excited. And of course for parents as well. Parents love hearing about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster and the Snallygaster. And so it's an interesting topic for parents to get involved in with their kids as well.
I mentioned I was touring Puerto Rico during the Chupacabra craze. I've had the honor of touring a lot of the country with my shows, and I do remember being up in Burlington, Vermont, and performing. There was a great event that I used to perform at for many years called the Green Mountain Choo Choo, and it was in Burlington, Vermont, on the banks of Lake Champlain. And they have their cryptid there called Champy. And I remember people would come up and I'd be looking out over this beautiful lake and the natives would ask me, do you see Champy? I'm like, who? And they go, out there, and they point and they go, yeah, you can see his head. It's out there bobbing up and down. I couldn't see anything, but they certainly seemed to believe it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Champy is a big one for sure. And when people think about cryptids, they may think that there's just a few, but really there are thousands of cryptids all over the world that different countries, different cultures believe in. So once you start researching cryptids, you discover that they are everywhere. It's really quite amazing.
And I think the thing that makes it so much more amazing is that we've actually discovered a couple of cryptids, a couple of these animals that were thought to be, the product of imagination and myth have actually, they exist.
That's absolutely right. And the interesting thing about cryptids is that they can be really animals that animals, plants, fish, insects that we haven't yet discovered, that some of them will be discovered, because there are still millions of species out there of plants, animals, fish, insects that have not been discovered that we will discover. But also one thing that's really exciting that we're discovering is animals that we thought were extinct that then resurface many years later. For instance, this isn't a mammal, but a fish here in Colorado. A couple summers ago, there was a fish that was caught, and it was the San Juan cutthroat brown trout. And supposedly it had been extinct for many years, but they rediscovered it. And that's been true for several different animals and plants. There was a flower that was just rediscovered in Hawaii that people thought had gone extinct. So cryptids are not only things that we have yet to discover, but they are things that we thought are gone, but are actually still around. So that's really exciting as well.
It really is exciting. This is fascinating. I definitely want to spend some time talking about the cryptid keeper. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit? You mentioned there's two cryptids that we discovered were real, the platypus and the okapi, you said?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of myth that existed about those two animals before they were discovered, and then how they were discovered?
So the okapi is a mammal in Africa, and it is half zebra, half giraffe. And so if you were to hear the description of that, you would say, no, there's no way that animal exists. That's a myth. That's a legendary animal that isn't real. And I can't remember the exact date when it was discovered, but basically many explorers from America were going to Africa, and they were coming back with tales, or they were hearing tales about this legendary animal, half giraffe, half zebra. And they're like, such a thing does not exist. Until one day, again, I can't remember the exact date, but it was discovered. And then it went from being a legendary animal or a cryptid to being real. So things are only stories and imagination until they become real. And same thing with the platypus. People were describing this odd, water-dwelling creature with this duck's bill and kind of a beaver tail. Many cryptids are described as kind of half and half animals, having the qualities of two different animals at once. And it was deemed to be just a creature of stories until it was actually discovered. And so maybe, when I do school visits, I tell kids, maybe we think that Bigfoot is just a story and this thing of legend until one day we might actually find him, and then he won't be seen as this creature of legend. He'll just be walking amongst us.
Yeah, Bigfoot is one of those ones that drew me in back when I was in high school. And I thought, wow, how cool will it be to discover Bigfoot? And it just fueled my imagination.
Absolutely. And, and it may seem like kind of a frivolous thing, like, hey, don't get kids believing in Bigfoot. But they're discovering that cryptozoology is actually acting as a gateway science for kids, where once they learn that the same way that you would prove the existence of Bigfoot is the same way that they prove the existence of the okapi, it's getting kids more interested in the life sciences, in marine biology, in zoology. So they're saying that cryptids are kind of the modern day dinosaurs, because when I was a kid, so many dinosaur bones were being discovered, and all of a sudden every kid wanted to be an archaeologist. And now that cryptids are kind of coming into the consciousness, many more kids are getting interested in science because they want to actually search for these animals.
Well, it's awesome that cryptozoology is inspiring kids to explore the STEM fields. I'm curious, what inspired you and your interest in cryptozoology?
I wish I had a very scientific reason, but it's kind of a silly reason. Charlie Sheen inspired me. Many, I have Charlie Sheen to thank for this.
Do we have to put an adult content warning on this now?
No, not at all. Not at all. But many years ago, Charlie Sheen, when he was, in his very exuberant phase, we'll call it,
okay.
he put together a hunting party to go to Alaska to find the otter man. And I read this article about how he was in Alaska hunting the otter man. And I thought, who is the otter man and what does Charlie Sheen want with him? And so I started researching the otter man and discovered that it was a cryptid. And I thought, what's a cryptid? I've never heard of it. And many people may not have heard the word cryptid because even though it's been around since the 1980s, it was just put into the Merriam-Webster dictionary a year ago in April. So it's a newly sanctioned word, let's say, but it has been used since the 1980s. And once I discovered the world of cryptids and the world of cryptozoology and discovered that there was an international cryptozoology museum, I thought, my goodness, this is a world that I know nothing about, that if I were a kid, I would want to learn about it. As an adult, I want to learn about it. And so that was what set me on my path for writing these adventure novels.
Wow. Well, tell us about the second novel in the Cryptid Duology.
Yes, so The Cryptid Keeper is the sequel to The Cryptid Catcher, and it is just the continued adventures of Clivo and the Myth Blasters. And the Myth Blasters is the group of kids who are able to research and actually find cryptids. And so it is their continued adventures into finding cryptids and saving the world.
Wow. As you're describing this, I'm imagining my, 13-year-old self, my 10-year-old self, and I would be so into this duology. I think that as a parent of a 10 or 13-year-old, I would be so into this. It would be such a fun pair of books to sit down and co-read with our kids. I'm just imagining the hours of conversations and the hours of researching. I mean, if you don't end, if after listening to this podcast, if you're not on Google trying to find out what in the world an okapi looks like, I don't know what's wrong with you, because that's the first thing I'm going to do. And I'm just imagining, a family sitting down. What kind of conversations could you have on the way to school, on the way to soccer practice, talking about the cryptid catcher and what kind of creatures that we might imagine are existing out there?
Absolutely. And, all over the country, there are so many Bigfoot festivals. There are so many cryptozoology festivals. I've done book signings at Bigfoot museums. And what's so fun is that when I sit there and start talking to kids about these cryptids and legendary animals, eventually the parents come over and they start talking to me just as much as the kids, because they start talking about stories that they've heard of Bigfoot sightings in their area, or, Loch Ness monster trips that they've taken with their parents. And so it just really becomes this huge, fun family event where the parents are just as excited to talk about these legends as the kids are. And so it really does become just this whole family endeavor to learn about all of this.
One of the things I'd love to do, we mentioned the Chupacabra a couple of times. Some people may not be familiar with that name. I think most people listening have heard about Bigfoot. Can you tell us a little, just let folks know a little bit about the Chupacabra and its origins?
Yes, so the Chupacabra is known as the goat sucker. And it basically is it looks like a mangy dog. The sightings of it have it look like a mangy dog, and it's mainly been seen in Puerto Rico. It's a fairly new cryptid. I believe that it's only been seen, if I'm not mistaken, since about the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So it's a rather modern day cryptid, and it is called the goat sucker because people, before they started seeing the Chupacabra, they started seeing goats that were just sucked dry of their blood, and kind of like a vampire had taken the blood from them. And then after people started seeing these goats sucked of their blood, they started seeing this mangy dog-like creature roaming through the land, and they started attributing it to this creature, and they called it the Chupacabra.
You know, it makes total sense that legend, that cryptid became real to so many people down in Puerto Rico. There are thousands and thousands of feral dogs that are walking around the island, and they all look exactly like that mangy creature you described.
Interesting.
And in fact, the last time I was down visiting family, I was outside one of our family members' shop in San Juan, and this street dog came along and just kind of nuzzled up next to me, and I patted it, but I was a bit terrified of it. I'm like, oh, if this thing bites me, I'm going to be in a hospital somewhere.
Right. And when I'm talking about these cryptids, I have to be really careful that I'm giving accurate information, because when I first started writing my books, I would just kind of take a cryptid and make up whatever I wanted to about it. But after a while, I reached out to Loren Coleman, who is the founder of the International Cryptozoology Museum, and he's been searching for cryptids for about 40 years now. He's considered a worldwide expert on cryptids, and his museum is in Portland, Maine. And when I started asking him about cryptids, he actually read The Cryptid Catcher, and he fact-checked it. And he was like, I'm not signing off on this. You made up stuff. And I was like, but Loren, these are animals that haven't been found. Like, can't I make stuff up? And he basically was like, absolutely not. There is a scientific history to these creatures. There are documented stories that these aren't just frivolous things that you can play around with. We have firsthand sightings. We have certain evidence. He's like, this is a field of research that people take very seriously, and it gave me great appreciation for these cryptids, that you can't just make up whatever you want about them, that they actually might be real. And again, we have found some of them. So it gave me a great respect and honoring for this field.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Tell us is there a website for my friend in Maine's Cryptozoology Museum?
Yes, I would Google the International Cryptozoology Museum. I actually spoke at the International Cryptozoology Conference last year, and where people from all over the world came to hear about the latest research in cryptozoology. While there, I spoke to a man who had put together a database of every sea serpent sighting throughout history. And this database included, was it freshwater? Was it saltwater? What time of day was it? All these different variables. And he had over 4,300 documented sea serpent sightings. And I encourage you to look at the International Cryptozoology Museum online. And if you're looking for kind of the definitive book on cryptozoology, for actual research. Mine is certainly a fun book of fiction, but I encourage you to get Loren Coleman's, and it's Loren, Loren, Coleman, Coleman, and his book is, I believe it's called Cryptozoology A to Z. And that is certainly, if you are looking for, the actual research that has done on all these different cryptids, that is definitely a fun companion book to my book, so that as you are reading about all the cryptids that I mention in my book of fiction, you can actually go to this encyclopedia that will give you more in-depth information about these cryptids.
Wow, this is fascinating. Well, I definitely want to find out where we can go online to connect with you. But before we do, you had mentioned to me that you're hoping that the Cryptid Duology becomes a Cryptid Trilogy. Can you give us a sneak preview of what we might find in that third book in the series?
Well, for basically, as the way book publishing goes, it was a 2-book deal. And so I had to create a story that would last for 2 books. So in the first 2 books, it's basically the story wraps up, but I left what I like to call the Darth Vader spinning off into space thread of a story, meaning, in the very first Star Wars, when the Death Star is destroyed, I hope that's not a spoiler for anybody, Darth Vader goes spinning off into space. And so even though the story is wrapped up, you have this thread of something that could come. So in the first 2 books, I wrap up one big story, but I do have this thread going out that I'm hoping I'll be able to pick up into an entirely new adventure. Of course, with Clivo and the Myth Blasters, but the stakes get even more raised.
Awesome. Well, I know folks are going to want to visit your website. It's very, very cool. Tell us where we can find you.
Yes, you can find me at lijafisher.com. And my first name is spelled Lijafisher. My name is Latvian, so it has that silent J in there. And on my website, I have information about my books, and I also have a lot of information about different cryptids. So you can go on my website for just a little taste for cryptids and cryptids in the news that are out there. So feel free to check it out and send me a message. I respond to people, and I'll even send you a Bigfoot Believes in You sticker if you write to me.
Well, we definitely believe in Lija Fisher. Check it out, lijafisher.com, and check out the Cryptid Duology. It's the first book is The Cryptid Catcher, and the sequel is The Cryptid Keeper. We've been speaking to Lija Fisher. Lija, thanks so much for being part of the show.
Thank you. And also, if I could mention, during this time when small businesses are struggling, I encourage you to order books from your local indie bookstore to support them during this time of a time of isolation.
Excellent idea. Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Daniel Williamson. He'll be here to talk about Look at Me, I'm Learning. That's the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. If you are the author of a fantastic children's book, we would love to have you as a guest. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy, and it gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your great book. Please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the contact button that you will find at the bottom of the page. Let us know about your great book. We will let you know the next easy steps. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so very, very wonderful. Of course, we want to thank Lija Fisher. Be sure to check out her Cryptid Duology. Also want to thank my incredible team, starting with my amazing producer, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my awesome author ambassador, Peggy Cotto. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy for having my back here in the studio. But most of all, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.